Instead, to salvage the educational value of this run, let me talk a little bit on the subject of consistency and why you're going to see certain factions in this series more than others. Optimization exists as a function of consistency, and it can be defined very simply. Once we acquire the cards we want, the next step is to be able to consistently draw into them and have sufficient resources to play them. Certain factions are simply better at this than others. If I were to place each faction on a graph, where the x-axis represents power and the y-graph represents consistency, I would put Awoken right at the top left. Simply put, you just feel safe playing Awoken, but you're likely leaning on your support faction to clear floors. If you build your deck in a certain way, it is entirely possible to draw 10 cards every turn except the first, without picking a draw relic from the boss. This frees you up, particularly at Ring 3, for using that pick to problem solve if you find yourself short of consistency in space. The sheer fact that Root Seeds exists means you will be seeing a lot of Awoken in these optimized runs. Melting Remnant is a close second. The danger of burnout makes them far less consistent than Awoken, but the power that the faction brings is directly tied into consistency. Between artifacts, which are useful every single turn, and Reform, which adds options when needed, it should be noted that Remnant has the game's only unit tutors in the form of Molded and Wicked Blaze. For those unfamiliar with the term, a tutor is a card which searches your deck for a specific card. It is widely regarded as the most powerful type of card in practically any card game. It comes from Magic the Gathering's Demonic Tutor, part of their 1993 Alpha release. Hellhorn consistency comes from its very basic design. In short, all of the faction mechanics, imps, armor, rage, they all just play well together, meaning that Hellhorn card drafts will feature very few cards that are literally unplayable in the run. Of particular note here is Torch. If a deck is built around a useful self-ping, imps, revenge, whatever, then Torch manages to stay useful the entire run, allowing you to be more liberal with your removals, and, once again, adding more consistency to your deck. The strength of Stygian's consistency comes from the quality of its units. Few Stygian units have absolutely no place in a run, meaning that a Stygian banner is almost always a welcome sight, and none of them exceed 2 pips of space, meaning that barring something really interesting, you should never have to pick space from a boss relic. The Incant plan and Offering Token in particular allows for further card draw. Unfortunately, when it comes to spell cards, Stygian trades away most of its consistency for power. Random discard and full hand discard mechanics, damage spells in conflict with incant spells, and frostbite in conflict with spell damage means an above average number of low rolls from Stygian draft packs. Umbra is in a very weird place in this regard. As surprising as it may be to hear, in the early game, Plink is actually more consistent than Shadesplitter. The reason for this is because Plink does exactly what it says on the first half of its card. It does 1 damage to 2 random units. This makes it useful for survival in rings 1 and 2, and potentially beyond if resources are invested. Shadesplitter, however, gives you a random uncommon or common morsel, meaning you just play it and drop whatever shows up. After ring 3, however, Plink falls off a huge cliff and becomes practically useless, requiring the investment of resources or removals. Throughout the run, Umbra's biggest strength and consistency comes from its ability to manipulate space. In short, an intrinsic space prism means never having to pick space at the boss, and that's certainly not their only option. So, summary of Umbra: very consistent early game, not consistent late game. So remember how in the beginning I made that power and consistency graph and put Awoken in the top left? Well, Wormkin is the bottom right. High power, low consistency. Infusion is the primary reason for this. This mechanic generates echoes and fuels practically every unit and spell in the faction, and adds a 2 in 3 chance on every draft the card you want is not infused, meaning that picking that card entails sacrificing echo generation. This is important because of the next disadvantage, extract. This adds another condition to the playability of a card. You must have sufficient Ember and sufficient echoes to play it. Let's say you start with a pair of echo transfers in your starter deck and draw both of them turn 1 with no purple cards. You're now off to a terrible start in that fight. Add a lack of synergy between etch and reap and the wide variance of cost and space requirements in their units, and the only time you're likely to see Wormkin in this series is paired with Awoken, Remnant, or Hellhorned.